Wendy Simpson sat in a chair, looking around. Just a few minutes earlier, she had been in the bedroom she shared with her husband of 5 years, Reggie. Strange, she thought. She couldn't remember what exactly she was doing. It was like she was there one second, and then here, the next. How did it happen? She looked around the room. There were no windows, and she couldn't see where the door might be. There was no obvious source of light, but the room was bathed in an almost overwhelming white light that seemed to be coming from everywhere. Everything in the room was white. The short robe she was wearing, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the chair she was sitting on, and the table in front of her. Strange, she thought. There are no shadows anywhere. She felt that the room was a little stuffy, and beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. She wiped the sweat with the sleeve of her robe. Finally, the door opened, and a thin man in a white suit and tie approached the table. He sat down, opened the folder, and placed it on the table in front of him. He looked at the folder before looking at it. He looked at her bare legs, her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, and the swell of her breasts. She really was very beautiful. In another universe, he himself could have played for her. What a loss, he thought to himself. "Wendy Simpson," he said. "It's right?" He watched as she nodded. "Please answer yes or no," he added. "Yes," she said. "I'm Wendy Simpson. Where am I? What am I doing here?" He smiled briefly before answering. He's seen it hundreds of thousands of times. No, definitely millions of times. "You really don't know, do you?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I don't know," she answered. "It's all right," he said. "This is completely normal. Soon you will know everything." "It's quite warm here," she said. "Can I have a glass of ice water or something?" He smiled before answering. "Actually, I think it's a little chilly here," he said. "Also, they don't serve soft drinks here. Believe me, there are many people here who would happily drink a glass of ice water," he added with a slight chuckle. He always liked to say that to new arrivals. "Now let's get down to business. It sounds like you were a very naughty little girl," he said. "I'm very sorry," she said quietly. He looked at her before speaking. "Never apologize," he said firmly. "In any case, it's too late to apologize, and believe me, the apology will still remain unheeded. All I ask is that you don't judge me," she said. "I know I'm not perfect, but I've always tried to be good. I'm not here to judge you," he said. "You've already been tried. I'm here to determine what level to place you on. Now let's get down to business." The entire wall changed, and Wendy felt like she was watching a giant movie of her life. "As a child, you repeatedly disobeyed your parents and lied to them more than once," he said. The film changed scenes as he spoke, reflecting the events he mentioned. "All pretty standard stuff. You were 12 years old when you stole this little trinket from the little village shop you visited with your mother. Do you remember this?" "Yes," she answered. "I thought no one could see me." He grinned. "That's what everyone says," he said. "You were very active and had 3 abortions by the time you got to college, and the last one was so bad that doctors had to cut out your tubes." "You were what, almost 19 then? You never told your husband about this, did you?" "Oh, God," she said. When they first got married, she told her husband that she had female problems that were preventing her from getting pregnant. He bought her lies hook, line, and sinker, and never pressed her for more information. "Do you know all this?" He looked at her sternly, and his face turned dark red. "Never mention that name here, miss. Do you understand?" She nodded her head. "Yes," she said. "I understand." She quickly pulled herself together, realizing that she would now apologize. He turned back to the file in front of him, and his face returned to a more normal color. "Let's see," he said, continuing where he left off. "By the time you graduated from high school, you were having sex with almost every boy in your class. The only thing that kept you out of trouble was the fact that you were already over 18. In fact, the only reason you graduated from high school was because you slept with one of your teachers for a passing grade." She remembered that incident. She didn't do very well in high school, mostly because she was too busy partying with the soccer team. Her English teacher, Mr. Ross, was a young, handsome bachelor. So one day after school, she cornered him and begged him for a second chance. He told her it was too late, but assured her that he might be willing to give her a passing grade in exchange for sex. By that time, she was already over 18. She locked the door, stripped naked for him, and began to have sex with him as best she could, and even better. He gave her a B, which ensured her graduation. "You continued like this all the time you were in college," the man said. "You had a reputation as a party girl and an available lover. Then you started using drugs. Honestly, I'm surprised you actually finished school. It was then that you met Reginald Simpson, the man who, unfortunately, became your husband." She remembered meeting Reggie in the common room. He was such a handsome young man with dreams for the future. He treated her like a queen. In his eyes, she was a goddess in many ways. She thought that she could change her life if only he would marry her. They had been dating for several months before he popped the question. Naturally, she agreed, and they got married. "You promised to be exclusive with him, but you couldn't, didn't you?" asked the man. "Actually, you had sex with all the male strippers at the bachelorette party." As he spoke, video footage of her party played on the wall, and she saw a giant version of herself being made airtight by 3 muscular, well-hung strippers, none of whom were wearing any protection. "Truth be told, it was a few days before you approached poor Reggie for sex, wasn't it?" asked the man. She nodded ashamedly as he glared at her. "Yes, it was like that," she said. "There's nothing to be ashamed of," the man said. "What is done is done. It's too late to take any of this back." He went back to his folder and the video changed as he spoke. "We'll see," he said. "On your wedding day, you managed to have sex with your husband's best man just a few minutes before you walked down the aisle. I bet you really enjoyed going through the ceremony and remembering that you just cheated on your future husband, don't you?" She remembered that day and how much of a cheater she felt when she did it. "Just a little," she answered meekly. "He was your husband's best friend, wasn't he?" "Yes, I was," she answered. "And poor Reggie never found out?" asked the man. Wendy shook her head. "No, he didn't find out," she said. "You managed to remain faithful to your husband throughout the honeymoon, but you quickly returned to your old tricks," the man said. "After you were hired as a legal secretary, you began flirting with men in your office and had sex with several of them over the next few months. You even brought them to your home when Reggie was away on business trips, didn't you?" "Yes," she answered. She looked at the wall and saw her having sex with 2 men. "You really cheated on your husband, didn't you?" asked the man. "He never knew, never suspected anything, even when you gave him careless seconds or fed him the cream that your lovers left for you in your house. He thought I was really horny for him when he came back from his trips," she said. "He had no idea." "It's because that ignorant idiot loved you," the man said. "Meanwhile, you were laughing to yourself, weren't you? You liked your power over him, didn't you? You can tell him anything, and he will believe you." "I think so," she said. In truth, this man was right. She often laughed to herself when she thought about how she cheated on her husband. All the time they were married, she thought that she got away with her adultery. But the truth is that you hated him, didn't you? After all, he was busting his ass for the 2 of you while you were having sex with one of your lovers. "I didn't hate him," she said. "I loved him, only in a different way." "Bullshit," said the man. "You forget that we know everything, even the thoughts that were running through your head. You didn't respect him. You thought he was a weakling who would never become as rich and powerful as the men you had sex with. He was just a substitute for you, someone who helped you in between having sex with your lovers. In fact, you thought of him as just a stepping stone until you caught someone else who could give you the life you really wanted. Isn't this true? Don't even think about lying to me. We already know what was on your mind." "Okay," Wendy said, surprised that this man knew so much about her and what she really thought about her ignorant, horned husband. "I admit it," she added, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "Stop crying," the man said, disgusted with her. "It's too late to regret. You made your choice, and now you pay the piper." "Don't I have another chance?" she asked. "Please, I will compensate him for everything. I promise." The man laughed before answering. "Give me a break," he said. "Do you think this is some kind of reality show or something? You've had a lifetime of second chances and you've blown them every time. Maybe there is something I can do or give to you to change your mind," she began, opening her robe so he could look at her naked body. "I know you want this. What every man wants." She spread her legs a little so he could see her. She licked her lips as he looked at her and tried to seduce him. He looked at her and then suddenly laughed loudly. "Do you really think you can seduce me?" he asked. "Come on, try a little if you can." She reached out and tried to wrap both her arms around him, but suddenly pulled back, her hands burning as if she had touched acid. She looked and saw red marks on her hands, and similar marks where she touched him. He laughed loudly again. "What's the matter? Is it too hot to handle?" he asked, laughing madly. Wendy sat back in her chair, feeling defeated. For the first time in her memory, she was unable to interest a man in her. She stared at the wall, watching videos of her many flirtations. It seemed like it was going on forever. It would never stop. For the first time in her memory, she truly hoped to see an ad, something to stop what was playing. She watched as a video of the company's last Christmas party, which she had attended with her husband, was shown on the wall. After giving the poor guy sleeping pills and some drugs, she left with 3 of her male colleagues and had sex with them in one of the rooms the company set aside for party-goers who were too drunk to drive. Afterwards, she slipped back into the party, woke up her husband, and drove him home. Thanks to alcohol and drugs, he never found out that his beloved wife had cheated on him, just now. She remembered laughing about it all the time. She also continued to have fun about it the next day when she was at work, talking about it and joking with the 3 men with whom she had sex the night before at a party. "To tell you the truth, you were quite cruel to your husband, weren't you?" asked the man. As she thought about it, she realized that she had been cruel to the only man who had loved her unconditionally. "Yes," she answered quietly. "Do you know how your husband finally figured it out?" asked the man. Wendy shook her head. "No, I don't know," she answered. "He caught a contagious disease from you that is sexually transmitted," the man said. "On the day when he was supposed to leave the city on a business trip, he went to the toilet and felt severe pain and cramping in the urinary canal, so he found a replacement at work, took a day off, and went to see his doctor. After he got the test results proving he had an STD, he went home to meet you. Imagine his surprise when he walked into the house and heard you and your lover having sex in your bedroom. Tell me, do you remember the last few minutes before you got here?" Wendy thought about it, but couldn't remember anything. "No, I don't remember," she answered. "No problem," he said. "This is quite normal, considering what happened. Let me jog your memory a little." While she was looking at the wall, the video changed. Then she suddenly remembered what happened. She was at home with one of her colleagues. To be precise, she was in her bedroom, naked on the bed she shared with her husband, and her lover, Jake, was having sex with her. They did not notice how her husband appeared in the bedroom with a pistol in his hands. She didn't know he was there until she looked up and saw that she was looking down the barrel of a very large and powerful pistol. Reggie had a large collection of weapons that he kept under lock and key. Rifles, pistols, shotguns, you name it. He silently cocked the gun and pulled the trigger. The last thing she remembered was a loud shot and a flash from the barrel. The video on the wall showed what happened to her head, which essentially exploded when the bullet pierced her skull. The next bullet hit Jake in the groin. Wendy began to shake as she watched the video. "This can't be true," she said, and tears streamed down her face. "This didn't really happen, did it?" "Oh, yes, it happened," said the man. "That means I'm dead," she sobbed. "Please tell me this isn't happening." "Yes, this is happening," he said. This happened. "What about Jake and my husband?" she asked. "It's a little late to worry about him," the man said. "But since you asked, your lover ended up in the hospital. He will live, but he won't be able to have any more children, but that's probably a good thing. Your husband realized what he had done and turned the gun on himself. Is he dead too? She asked. The man shook his head. No, he said. Somehow he screwed up, and the bullet never penetrated his skull, although it did damage his face. He's in surgery and will probably spend a few years in a mental hospital, but he'll move on, without you. Will I ever see him again? She asked. No, answered the man. Before he pulled the trigger, he begged you-know-who for forgiveness, he added, pointing upward. Up there, such things are very popular. So he killed me and will get away with it? She asked. I wouldn't say that, the man shrugged. There will be an investigation, charges will be brought, but a good lawyer will defend him, probably citing temporary insanity. Ultimately, he tried to commit suicide. Anyone who tries this won't be working with a full deck, if you know what I mean. As I said, he will spend some time in the rubber room, but eventually he will rebuild his life. Unlike you. What will happen to me? She asked. Well, we're not the type to give people what they want, he told her. You can forget about spending eternity having sex with every creature. But we have a good lake here. It's a little hot, but don't worry. You can get used to it after a few centuries. She looked at him in horror. What do you mean? She asked. He pressed a button on the table and the floor beneath it opened. The chair she was sitting on was gone, and so was her robe. She found herself standing, naked, in front of a man who was now looking at her. There was a disgusting smell in the room that reminded her of rotten eggs. Moans could be heard coming from a hole in the floor. What is this? She asked. Well, that's where you'll spend the rest of eternity, he said with an evil grin. Welcome to hell! Her eyes widened when she finally realized where she was. He heard her scream as she dived naked into the lake of fire. He pressed another button and the floor closed again. Oh, how nice it is to hear the lamentations of sinners. What a sexual loss, he said, addressing no one in particular. He closed the folder, stood up, and walked out the door to get ready for the next shower. They never learn, he thought. It's all right, he decided. Hell isn't even half full yet. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.